this is Life Above Coal. It's a workshop that I developed a little while ago, and I've actually done this with a group of young people, actually year sixes in an alternative provision. They were parents who were not sending their children to school, so it was like an unschooling type situation. I've also done it with university students at Kingston on a politics and human rights course. And my colleague Daniel, who works with me at London Mining Network, has done it with some year 9 groups, because we try to design our materials to work with all different groups. I'm Kerima, and Kerima Mohideen, and I'm the education coordinator at London Mining Network. That doesn't mean I'm an expert on either mining or the topic that we're going to discuss here. My job is to take all of the stuff that we do and turn it into something that is presentable and interesting and engaging for the public, for schools, for universities, and so on. So who are we? We're an alliance of human rights groups, development groups, solidarity groups, from the very small activist groups right through to large organizations like Survival International and Amnesty International. We have a formal network, and we also have lots of informal networks depending on who we work with. What we do, we work with communities harmed or threatened by harm by companies listed on the London Stock Exchange, or with other London connections. So here are just a few examples. The very historic Rio Tinto, 150 years of colonial plunder this year. They're celebrating their anniversary, and we shall be reminding them that it's not that great a century and a half of bad behavior. There's Glencore, another really a company that has brought a lot of suffering and hardship to people. Adani, this is going to be the company most relevant to today's talk, BHP, Anglo-American, and so on. So these are just a few of the companies that are in focus in our work. Before I start, I'd like to just say a couple of things. As you are all educators, this is not normally what I would say if I was doing this with a group of young people or with students, but teaching about mining is difficult, and it is a challenge. First of all, it's a subject that's really information heavy and potentially very dry, and it is inadequately addressed in school textbooks. In fact, really badly addressed in some cases. These stories can be grim and depressing, but it's really important to avoid the narrative that people on the front lines of mining are only victims of mining. We also must not leave young people traumatized and depressed and feeling that there's nothing that they can do. We don't want to give them lots of bad news. And we also have to acknowledge that mining is a really political subject, and allow ourselves as educators to be challenged in our understanding of how the world works, as well as what the solutions could be to the issues we come up against. So how do we address these problems? First of all, this is what I want to show you in this Skillshare. It's really, I mean, all teachers know this now. I have spent many years as an EAL and literacy teacher, teaching also humanities, geography and history, and it's really important to break information up into smaller chunks and work through it collaboratively to help children understand that knowledge is a shared thing, and learning about it can be a shared process. In terms of the not leaving people thinking that other people are victims of mining, I think it's really important to focus on people's resistance to mining. There is a long history of resistance to mining. There's a long history of resistance to and those sorts of struggles in this country, as well as in developing countries. I think it's important also to be guided by what people say. Their struggles almost always have greater relevance than just being about their communities and their livelihoods. So I had a conversation with someone at a demonstration not long ago who said, oh, what you do, those people that are fighting for the forest, that's about self-interest, isn't it? It's about their homes and their livelihoods. And I have to say, no, actually, if you listen to what they say, it's not just about that. And aren't we all fighting for our homes and our livelihoods at some point? So that's important. And also, I think we should really be open to exploring radical ideas about radical change with young people, because these are contained in some of the things that some of the indigenous people, for example, who are fighting mining, have to say about the world as well. Degrowth, Jason Hickel in the Go-To book, Less is More. Donut economics, Kate Raworth. In Latin America, the ideas of buen vivir, how we might live on this planet. Gandhian economics, and in the US, Native American peoples and their allies have come up with an answer to the Green New Deal, which they call the Red Deal, which is very interesting to look at. So in that spirit, let's start by marking International Women's Day by celebrating some of the women who have for decades been resisting coal mining in India. First of all, the woman on the header for the Eventbrite for this workshop, Soni Sori. She's an Adivasi human rights defender and anti-mining activist. She's the reason why I came into trying to learn more about this and developing a workshop about coal mining in India. Because quite a few years ago, I was involved in a campaign to free her. She was arrested in 2011 on false charges of terrorism and released in 2013. And she's the winner of the 2018 Frontline Defenders Award. She's a formidable campaigner against mining and organising the communities in the very area that we're going to be looking at in the Skillshare. This is Hidme Markham. She's Adivasi, Adivasi are the indigenous people, human rights defender and anti-mining activist. She campaigns for people falsely held in jail, and then this happened to her as well. She was arrested in March 2021 on, again, false charges of terrorism. In fact, she was speaking at an International Women's Day meeting, and police walked in and just pulled her into a van and took her away. She was finally released earlier this year. This woman, Sudha Bharadwaj, she's a trade unionist, an activist, and she is a lawyer. She's worked for over 30 years in Chhattisgarh. These women all work in the region that we're going to be talking about in this workshop. She was arrested on false charges, again, of terrorism in the notorious Bhima Korajan case in 2018. This is where 17 or 18 people were just simply rounded up and accused of conspiring to kill Modi. Some of them, it was found, had false evidence planted on their computers by the Pegasus, using the Pegasus technology that has been in the news so much recently. She was released on bail in 2021. She's a very interesting person. She was originally a maths and physics graduate. She went to volunteer in the workers and indigenous peoples movement in Chhattisgarh. They encouraged her to go and study to be a lawyer so she could go back and work with them. And she's dedicated her entire life to the struggles of the people there. I just would like to end with a few quotes from each of them. So Soni Sori, she really is fearless. She says, "The more I am tortured," because when she was arrested, she was brutally tortured. And yet she came out of prison fighting back. "The stronger I become. If they are successful in silencing me, they would show me as an example to silence everyone else." Sudha Bharadwaj. If you try to be safe and in the middle, you will never succeed. This is Sudha Bharadwaj. And Hidme Markham, the only possible way forward is to for all women to be united for our water and forests and for our lands, and to save them from mining. I'll come back to later why women are so important in this struggle. So we have here some really heroic individuals who are quite well known throughout India and in some cases internationally as well. But they're not alone. We'll see that the women in the villages of the forests of the region we're going to talk about are very strong in resisting mining. This is important to them. This is their land, their livelihoods depend on it, and they have everything to lose. Okay, so let's get started. This is where I would usually start with young people. In this workshop, we will be finding out about a group of people called Adivasis. They are the indigenous people of India. They are the largest group of indigenous people in the world, accounting for nearly 10% of India's population, so over 100 million people. This is not a marginal struggle, as some people sometimes say to me, oh, this is marginal struggles. They're not. There's a lot of people involved. A lot of people stand to lose an awful lot. They have fought hard for their rights and the land that they have always occupied to be recognised. So I just put a little note there, there's the various Forest Rights Acts and other acts that mean that they actually have the right to say no to big development projects on their land. But they fought for, I mean, decades after independence, they fought for these rights. Many depend on the forests for their livelihoods, so they may not all live in the forest all the time, but they do still use the forest for economic livelihoods. And their way of life may also provide the key to our survival. We will be finding out about the Adivasis who live in the Hasdeo Forest. Usually with working with young people, I do this as a worksheet activity, and I get them to mark things on the map, but I'm just going to run through this quickly with you. So the Hasdeo Forest is in Chhattisgarh state, which was founded, I think, in 2000, and it neighbours Jharkhand and Madhya Pradesh. And it is the state with the largest number of Adivasi people. And the Hasdeo Forest, I don't know, it's just in this area where the arrow is pointing to, between two areas, two sort of provinces called Sugurja and Korba. And it's about 1,700 square kilometres. So it's bigger than Greater London, and it's almost as big as East Sussex. So we're coming now to the first activity, life above coal. So what are we going to do? So the first activity is to actually find out about the lives of the people who live in the Hasdeo Forest. And as I said before, mining can be, or even not the mining, this is anthropological information, if you like, finding out, and sociological information can be quite an information heavy. And so this is a collaborative activity. So we're working in pairs or groups of 3, maybe 4, and to find out more about life in the Hasdeo Forest, we're going to match some statements to pictures. So the in-person participants have sets of cards on the table at the back, and the people online have the activity on a Jamboard, which is this one here. I've simplified it so it's quite quick for you to do. We've got 3 strips with pictures. On the Jamboard, you just have the pictures loose. The pictures have little sets of information, little cards to go with them, simply matching them. It's best to work in pairs or in groups, that's easiest.
All set.
Yeah.
You've done it, yeah. We've done it. Yeah.
Well, we think we have.
Yes. Mostly, yeah, that is a constitutional right for these people, which they have actually fought very hard to get.
So if any comments, anything that surprised you maybe, or interested you, or Izzy?
We were talking about how you could match the pictures and the text, but also it felt to us that you could have put the pictures in the middle and the text all around the outside, because actually they were so interconnected and so many bits of text related to the pictures, which we felt really resonated with your point about the interconnectivity. Sorry.
Yes, thank you. That's a good idea, actually. I'll think about that for next time.
But we enjoyed matching as well, and we thought they were lovely pictures showing a real range of things, from the kind of democracy in action to the medicines and the use of forest in so many ways. So the matching was fantastic.
Is anyone else? Would anyone else like to say something just before we move on? I'm just sorting out some technical issues here. Does anyone from here want to add anything? You can speak. I think you can speak to them as well.
I was interested in the, because I was doing tech, I didn't get to participate as actively, but I was interested in that there's the meeting for decision making, which sounds like it's an indigenous practice, but then it's sort of also got a national government support as well.
This is constitutional. This is in the Indian constitution. So they have the constitutional right to have these Gram Sabha, that they're called. They're village councils. Anyone who's of voting age can join them, and they are and they have the sort of final say in most cases over big development projects on their land. So they're a really important part of the Indian constitution. So in many ways, the Indian constitution is really good. It's about being able to enforce the rights of some of the people. Yes, so before we move on to the next activity, welcome back everyone. And is there, sorry, I keep talking to them and I should be talking to here.
It's all right.
Is there anything you would like to ask? I'm going to turn around so I can see better. Yes.
Thank you so much, Kerima. We loved the exercise, and particularly wanted to say the order to start with the land and the animals, and then the non-animal, but no, to start with the more than human world, and then go to humans. It was a really good journey to make. Thank you. You know, as much as we can digitally, it felt like visiting and then visiting the land and the animals, and then meeting the humans. There was an encounter, and in a really good order. So thank you.
Thank you. I guess no one needs to go through the answers then, because you've all managed to do this. That's great, because with this group here in the room, I just gave them the answers to look at. But once you've actually completed the activity, it's pretty self-evident whether it's right or wrong. So okay, great. Is there anything else anyone would like to say before we move on? Anyone here? Okay, so we're going to move on now to the second activity, which is to look at a typical diagram, a kind of geological diagram. So this is my drawing. It's not based on anything real. It's a sort of idealized version, but this is how a lot of people, a lot of scientists, a lot of governments, this is how they see the land. Underneath the Hasdeo Forest is a large reserve of coal. And you can see that in the two drawings that I've done, one for the jam board and one for the people working in here. So mostly in these drawings, we never really consider who or what lives above that coal. If I was working with a group of children, I would ask them, having done the other activity. So we're not going to spend too long on this, but the thing that I normally ask people to do in this workshop is to, thinking about what they've learned in the matching activity, to draw on top of this diagram what they can remember from the matching activity. You can have it in front of you, or try and remember is even better. A quick sketch. Nothing, it doesn't have to be beautiful. It's just a quick sketch, because this is a kind of reinforcing what we've just read and putting it onto something, reinterpreting it. So can I just please ask people again, it's best again if you work in groups, and again we go to the Jamboard. This time there is only one Jamboard, but there's lots of different pages.
University students tend to go to something like this.
Yeah, just before we move on, we had a little peek at the Jamboards, and they look amazing, because it's not easy, is it, to draw with those tools. And Also, there's been some fantastic work here, so I thought we ought to share a few of these drawings before we move on. But I just wanted to know if you had any questions or wanted to say anything about the you know, this activity, or anything that you noticed about it first.
Just one thing, Karen. I had a little worry in the first activity. It was great, and my little worry in the first activity, I think, is completely dealt with by this beautiful second activity. And my worry was, firstly, that there children would have varied access to the language in the descriptions, and there might be a tendency for sort of some to just do a kind of look for a key word and then look for that in the image, rather than thinking about the text, and then others might just really not get what was in the text. But this activity then enables, I think, you know, the two activities go together really well, and the discussions, you know, we kept on having discussions about what have we remembered, what have we forgotten, what needs to go in there. That's the very discussion that then will bring everybody in. So kind of my slight concerns about the first one are completely resolved by the second one, which then I think will enable the children, young people, to go back to those first ones and think about them with more depth.
Thanks, that's actually a really interesting and useful comment. In fact, if I was working with a group of children in person, I would be there intervening, explaining, and also probably explain some of the vocabulary beforehand as well. And probably take a little longer over these two activities with children than I would with you, because I know that you don't need all that explanation. It's harder to do that on Zoom with people, though, to be part of those groups. But yeah, thank you. That's and I'm glad it sort of resolved itself. Are there any other comments or questions? Yes.
I was just very struck by the original diagram is super familiar to me as like a sort of year 9 textbook diagram that we would just look at and be like, oh yes, I'm labeling now sedimentary rock and volcanic rock and things, and you know, which is not bad stuff to learn, but it's not the human, as you say, the life. So I think bringing the two things together has a little bit of magic to it.
Thank you. Actually, that's another thing. I usually talk to children a bit about the diagram and what's in it, and particularly point out the water table, the river, those sorts of things. Someone had their hand up. Sorry, Izzy.
Thank you. Yeah, I really love doing that. As Ellis and others know, I'm not always a fan of like slightly complicated online activities, and I actually relaxed into that, and it was such fun. And we found ourselves drawing together, so like making a sun together, you know, the sloth in the tree, and just having a relaxed chat about what we'd seen in the bits before and how we could do that. Just allowed us to process things quite gently. And it reminded me of in our Fly Kites Not Drones activity. You kind of take in all this information, and some of it's quite heavy and difficult. And then when you make the kites, is the chance to kind of chat about something. And while you're doing something and your hands are busy, I think your mind works differently. And I just really loved it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Phil, do you think you could screen share the Jamboards? Have you got them up? And we could have a look through them.
Yeah, can do. 1 second.
Yeah, it was kind of magical just watching them come to life before our very eyes.
Mysterious drawings appearing.
That all visible for you?
Ah, yes, great.
Oh wow. See them more there than there was before.
We kind of had fun drawing in a mining platform and then erasing it at one point. That was over here. And we, yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to say anything about the picture.
You've given yourself 3 merits as well.
They magically appeared.
That was Hans, obsessed with accreditation.
Shall we have a look at the next one? Oh, look at that, the animals coming to drink.
Beautiful elephant.
That's a strong elephant.
Yeah. And yeah, it's lovely. And the leopard. And people playing music on the far side as well. Yeah. And the forest on the left.
I like that when we saw it before, the elephant was slightly floating in the air, and someone has helpfully supplied it with something to stand on. Lovely.
I'm curious about what the elephant's doing exactly.
Oh, well, before someone drew a hill, I tried, because I just drew my elephant floating in the air. I wanted to make it look like it was jumping, because I didn't think of throwing a hill under it. So that's what the elephant was doing.
Very nice. And the next one. Oh, look at that sloth bear. Nice.
Oh my God, did someone draw that?
No, you can get pictures from this picture bank. So.
He's like genius.
And is that on the far left, is that a group of people meeting? Yeah.
Yeah, under the tree, and there's shade as well.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Fantastic.
Yeah, we loved it and agreed with with what Izzy was saying, just like drawing together and adding things, and feels very inclusive. This method, definitely.
Do you have a quick look at the
Yes, would
in-person
you
ones
like
as
to
well? If you can
come-
stop sharing, Phil.
Just come and show off yours. It might be hard to see. We only have pencils, so unfortunately no access to colour, but oh yeah, that's quite clear. So they've got the forest and some of the huts and people. Yeah.
Back a little bit. And up. Yeah. Yeah, we needed bolder colours.
I needed to push down all my pen.
Could I just ask Kerima, if did you draw together or did you draw separately? We wondered if, because we were online, it sort of forced us to draw more together. We just wondered.
They drew in pairs.
Okay.
Yeah, but when I've done this with, I did this activity, but about another country. So I have another version of this about Colombia. And I did that with a group of sixth formers, and they decided to work in groups. And so they actually did it in groups of sort of 5 or 6, making the drawings. And they're absolutely packed with little, they just use their pens, and they're packed with little sketches and annotations, and because they all piled in and drew things. So yeah. Drawing together is the important thing about this, not doing it on your own, I think. So just up in the corner of this slide, I'll just show you quickly, is one of the drawings done by one of the children in one of the groups a group of children in one of the groups. They've got people praying at the sacred grove, they've got the village, and they've got an elephant drinking at the water and a leopard on the other side. So people in here in the room asked about the paintings, and that I did actually want to look at the paintings, because that's quite important. Because before we move on to the sort of last part of this activity, I quite like us to think about how we saw this world of the Adivasis, but also how they see it. And so the largest group of people living in this area are the Gondi people. And they are really famous, like many of the indigenous peoples of India, for their art. And we should ask ourselves, well, how do they see their lives and their relationship to the forest? So I'm going to show you a painting in a minute. And it's by a woman artist, a Gondi woman artist. We're celebrating women today, it's International Women's Day. And she's called Durga Bai, and it depicts a Gondi village. And I think I've got a few questions. You can do this on your own, it's a reflective thing. But there's some questions if you just want to jot those down quickly. So what does it say about life in and around the Hasdeo Forest? So I want you to think about, where is the forest in the painting? Is this a modern village or an ancient village? What jobs can you see? What is important to Gondi people? And then a sort of bigger question to think about, how resilient do you think people living in forest areas are to pandemics or to climate change and associated lockdowns, for example? So if you just jot these questions down quickly on a piece of paper, I'll give you 30 seconds and I'll take you to the painting. So here we go. This is it's called Gal Mata, or the Cow Mother, and it's by a woman artist called Durgabai. And I should say that the colours are really brilliant because she's used acrylics for this picture. Okay, so we had some questions in the room. Would you like to come back from?
Yes, I was talking about the cow at the bottom in which the tree is rooted. We talked about the fact that cows are sacred and essential to the forest. They graze throughout the forest and they're essential for the biodiversity. And then someone mentioned a roof on top of the cow and that representing the community, and so that was quite an interesting discussion we had there.
Yeah, there's a parallel with that actually in the UK, because the Savanaki forest is a very old forest and where traditionally cows have been grazed in the forest. That's a really important thing. And ecologists have done research into these Adivasi areas where they graze cows and found that the biodiversity is much richer in those areas.
I thought it's interesting in answer to the question, where is this? So I think it is the forest, but not as a sort of separate forest. And it's sort of like the tree is a metaphor or a metonym for the whole forest and the whole people, because the tree has trees growing from it. It's trees within trees, or which made me think of the mycelial network and how trees talk to each other through mushrooms and things. But yeah, all the interconnectedness of everyone, the transport, the trades, yeah, and everyone doing everything by hand as well. It's like people are the branches of the tree as well.
Yeah, very busy. There's lots of activities. Can you make out any jobs? Anyone online want to say something about this? I think there's lots of comments actually. I should look at the chat. Great. Okay, I can see you all now. So if you have anything to say about this or any answers you'd like to add, please.
I'll add one more thing, please, Kerima. As you mentioned, the colour, the use of colour is so noticeable, isn't it? And the links between the colour seem like a metaphor for the interconnectedness of the people, the plants, the animals, and livelihoods as well.
Yeah, thanks. Does someone have the questions jotted down?
So there was the where, ancient or modern was the second one.
Is this an ancient village or a modern village?
Yes, I think you can see both. I think you've got modernity with the buses and the plane and the wider world, but there are things that I can imagine people have done for thousands of years.
How you define this as an ancient?
Yes. Yes.
Because it might be traditional,
yeah,
but it's still modern.
Yeah.
It's kind of like.
Yeah. I mean, children often pick up on the aeroplane and the train, yes. And I ask them about that, and they say, well, they seem very remote to these people's lives. So the train is something that maybe passes by or you use very occasionally, and aeroplanes are probably out of the reach of the incomes of many of these people, but it's something that maybe passes overhead sometimes. So there are, but it's there. It's there because it's part of what they experience, or what this artist wants to show that they experience. I asked people if they could spot any mining. Did you spot any mining in this? If you look at the far right of the picture.
Oh, there's a hand up from Martin.
Sorry, Martin.
Yeah, so sorry. I mean, it wasn't in response to that question, but it was earlier. Just I just wanted to say what an extraordinary and wonderful painting this is, and how complex and how much there is in it, and that whole sense of interconnectedness of past and present, of human, animal, and forest. That none of these things can exist without the others is all in this painting, and I think I've seldom I just think it's absolutely extraordinary, and you could spend an hour's lesson discussing this painting and still have lots more to say about our relationship with the natural world and the interconnectedness of all of that, and the way in which, you know, you cut it, and you cut all of it. So I just wanted to say that. It's probably just saying what is stating the obvious, but I just think it's, you know, the more you look, the more you find in this painting, I think.
So it comes from a book. It's been published in a book called Indigenous, and I just ask people to respect the copyright of this artist, so don't, you know, share it too widely and so on. I think it's okay to use it for lessons and in groups like this, but I think it, you know, it can't be published obviously without permission. So, but yes, it is an extraordinary painting. And on the far right of the picture, there is a small group of people mining what someone said that looks like frog spawn. I think that that's possibly iron, might even be coal, because there has been in the forest mining for thousands of years. In fact, people in the Indian epics would go to the forest to look for iron ore, as well as timber and so on. So, but it's always been really small scale and not particularly damaging. Okay, I think I'll just move on. Can I get
on the man.
Oh yeah, I see.
On the next slide.
No. Okay, right. So remember that we had the diagram that showed the coal reserves underneath this. So this is what is above the coal. What happens when the coal mine comes to the neighborhood or to the area? And so, yeah, that is a coal mine that's in this same area nearby, not very far away from, and so parts of this forest have already got coal mines in, you know, on the edges, but they would like to open up more, and that's what happens.
Is there never any consideration about putting a shaft down mining in that way, or was it because of presumably it's didn't have more money, but just
I don't know what people do. It just doesn't seem to happen anymore. That's a good question. I need to go back and ask people about that.
It's quite interesting if you go to places. If you go to places in this country where there was mining in the past, they've been able to almost restore, you know, the areas, but you can't. That's added, isn't it? You can't restore that.
No, and also
landscape.
So in Colombia, there's the example that I use in Colombia. There's a massive coal mine. Sections of that area have been restored, but they don't allow the people to go back, and it's never putting back what was there before. Quite often they use inappropriate trees or fast-growing things, or you know, it's not. You can never put it back, even if you restore it. So yeah. So someone asked, why don't they do deep mining, sort of underground mining, and mentioned that it's you know, send a mine shaft down, and also mentioned that some areas have been restored, and so the thing is that the more and more, also the problem with the deep mining is it's expensive, and the more and more that is mined from the earth, the lower grade the ores are. So it becomes not really worth doing that, and you create a lot of waste for a small amount of ore. That's one thing that, but specifically to this area, I need to go back and ask someone who knows more about this than me. The second thing is that it isn't really possible to restore areas even like this where they have done it. It isn't the same. The people are never allowed back. The vegetation that they use is different. The forest and how it was has gone essentially. And also it's not just a hole in the ground, there are seepages into the soil, into the water table. So there's all sorts of contamination, pollution that spread far beyond the area of the mine. So, and that's something that, and also there are huge spoils, huge waste. We have this in Wales, for example. There are lots still waste piles from coal mining that are still potentially unsafe as well. So yeah, it's a massively damaging industry. So I said it was important not to, sorry, I said it was important not to see people as victims and to remember that they know what's happening and they resist it. And embedded within the Indian constitution is their right to do so. So a bit like planning permission here, we can say no to something that's happening, but it is a struggle, and it's a struggle for them. So the Adivasi communities are determined to assert their constitutional right to say no to any more mining in this area. This area was declared a no-go area for mining some time ago because of the biodiversity and all those things, but now, you know, there's a new threat. So here we have a Gram Sabha, or a village council meeting, discussing a coal mining project in Chhattisgarh, in this area, way back in 2015. Their struggle has been going on for some decades against mining. And this is the same, not just in Chhattisgarh, but in Jharkhand and in other parts of India as well. So I just, to summarize some of what we've looked at, we're just going to watch a short film. This is so we've worked quite closely with Survival International on and off on these issues. And this is a recent film that they put up about the Hasdeo struggle.
In the heart of India lies a precious jewel. Hasdeo Forest, a rare oasis of intact, biodiverse forest in the middle of the country. This forest's abundance has not happened by chance. The 20,000 indigenous people who live here have shaped and nurtured it for generations. To the Gond, Orao, and other tribes of Hasdeo, the forest is not just home, the land of their ancestors, but is also a sacred place, a living being whose gods they revere, and which in turn provides them with everything they need.
हम लोग सब चीज मिलती जंगल हमार महुआ भी नाम थान और तेंदु पत्ता भी तोड़ थान जड़ी बूटी मिलती गाय गरुआ चरती लकड़ी लुठी नाम थान और जौन फल फूल होते ते हुला हमार तोड़ नाम थान खटान सब चीज हम लोग सुविधा मिलती.
But underneath this lush jungle lie vast coal beds. More than 5 billion tons, according to some estimates. Digging up this coal will destroy both the forest and the people. And burning it will be catastrophic for the climate. The authorities have vowed to push ahead, but the people of the forest are determined to resist. Two mines have already been established. The PEKB mine is operated by Adani.
तो रह नहीं गया जो खेती धंधा कर रहे थे न जंगल में जो पालतू जानवर हैं उनको चरा रहे थे वो सब खत्म हो गया हमेशा के लिए. तो पहाड़ तो झरिया ये सब बना कर रख दिए गड्ढा खोद कर.
रही बात है जो जंगल नदी के जो बीच में भारी जंगल था और इस जंगल में मतलब कहीं नदी किनारे कहीं गुफा था उसमें भालू रहते थे बड़ा बड़ा सर्प रहते थे मतलब आज वो मतलब सब समाप्त हो गई.
Despite the people's resistance and their right to their land under international law, the authorities are pressing ahead with plans to open more mines. Initial work on the third, known as Parsa, has already begun. The indigenous communities of Hasdeo are determined to stop this and all further mining in their forest.
धरती ये माँ है कोई जितने हैं सब उसके हम सब क्या है वह बेटे बेटियां हैं तो हम अपने माँ को बर्बाद होते थोड़ी देख सकते हैं. हम उसके लिए जान भी दे सकते हैं पर हम उसे छीनने नहीं देंगे न किसी को हम देंगे भी नहीं न बसाहट न खदान. हम खदान का विरोध करते हैं, पहले भी किए थे, अब भी करते हैं, भविष्य में भी करेंगे।
This land belongs to the tribal people of Hasdeo, and they belong to the land. Without Hasdeo, the people of the forest can't exist. And without the people, the forest will be destroyed.
अभी मुझे लगता है जरूरत सरकार को हमारे साथ खड़े होने की जरूरत है कि अगर इस क्षेत्र को बचाया जाए तो उस पर्यावरण की दृष्टि से सरकार को भी खड़े होना चाहिए कि इस क्षेत्र को बचाया जाए, और ये क्षेत्र बचेगा तो फिर देश भी बचेगी, वो समाज भी बचेगी जो पर्यावरण को संरक्षण करती है, जैसे आदिवासी समाज।
जमीन किसका है? अडानी की जागीर नहीं, लड़ेंगे।
On October the 2nd, 2021, which was Gandhi's birthday, hundreds of Adivasis marched on a 300-kilometre march to the state capital of Raipur to demand that their objections to coal mining be upheld by their elected representatives. It took them 10 days to complete the march. And, you know, these are some of the poorest people. They don't have walking boots or fancy equipment for walking such distances. They set off in their rubber slippers or their, you know, sandals. All the way they were harassed by Adani goons, because the company that is really interested in mining in this area is Adani. And I don't know, has anyone here heard of Adani? Heard the name Adani? Shout out if you are on the online. So Adani has been in the news just recently for Adani rose from quite a sort of humble position as a trader to being the third richest man in the world. And this is largely through coal mining and some other forms of mining. And he, and a lot of corruption, and massively supported by his close friend Modi, who's the current leader of the Indian. They support each other, and laws were relaxed to enable Adani to go ahead with many of his businesses. He's also buying up Indian infrastructure everywhere. But there's been a 2-year piece of research into the company, which has revealed all sorts of corruption and bad practice, which has caused Adani shares to tumble, and he's lost quite a lot in recent times, not gone completely. But one of the things that Adani does is in London sponsors a new green gallery, an energy revolution gallery in the Science Museum, despite the fact that his fortune is made from coal and continues to be made from coal. So I will come on to discussing that in a minute. But so Adani has made life incredibly difficult for these people. They've actually faked the permits to go ahead with the mining. So people had to sign a permit to say the mining could go ahead. Adani's people went in with fake documents and got people that they'd rounded up to sign those documents, so that the Adivasis are absolutely furious that this, you know, that the permission has been given but not in their name. And they are also, you know, constantly harassed. The sort of human rights situation and the violence in these mining areas is really bad. So just a couple of things. Why did they choose Mahatma Gandhi's birthday? Firstly, because they're making it really clear that their struggle is democratic and non-violent. This is a real difficulty for them in this area, because this is known as the Red Corridor. And this is where there has been this armed insurgency, the Maoists or Naxalites, been going on for decades now, absolutely decades. And so this area brings in all the force of the Indian state. And so there are, you know, security services who, you know, human rights is something that's kind of fallen to the wayside. And As we saw earlier, the 3 women that that we talked about, who are currently released, but who have all been in jail under false charges of false accusations of terrorist activities, because they use their anti-terror laws against villagers in many cases. And many, Sudha Bharadwaj, particularly the lawyer, had spent many years working on behalf of poor villagers who are just rounded up, accused of terrorism, thrown into jail, and could be languishing there for years because, you know, the process is slow. They don't have access to lawyers, and, you know, there's all sorts of problems with this. So, so they need to. They're making it really clear. They've taken an Indian national hero, Gandhi, to show that their struggle is non-violent, but also because Gandhi has had an alternative vision of development that has been taken up and developed by others as well. And I think that that's really important. This struggle is, these people understand that this struggle is not just about their world, but it's about the whole world. So just move on. Of course, if I was working with children, I'd say, do you recognize the man in the picture? So they say, we believe in we believe in Gandhiji's dream of India, of self-sufficient and of self-governing villages. Be a part of this movement to save our forest, our environment, and identity and country. So what can we do? There is homework, but not for you necessarily, but this is one thing, because obviously we run out of time, and, you know, there is homework. So find out about what people are doing here, solidarity work. So the company involved in the attempted destruction of the Hasdeo Forest is Adani, and Adani has agreed to sponsor a new gallery at the London Science Museum, which focuses on green energy. The Fossil Free Science Museum Coalition, which LMN is, London Mining Network is part of, are challenging this, and you can go and have a look at their website. What is really nice about this, if you're doing this, giving this homework to young people, is the website is very easy to read. It's not a complicated website, it's only got sort of a couple of pages. And there's a few questions to answer. What groups are involved in the coalition? So I think it's important to show young people and everyone that people work together on campaigns. Why do they say it is wrong for the Science Museum to accept money from Adani and other companies? And find some examples of things they have done to challenge the Science Museum. So we've had quite a few exciting events inside and outside of the Science Museum. So, and you know, all of you, or if you're based in London, keep an eye on what's happening, and you're welcome to come along. So when working with Key Stage 2, Key Stage 3, or even Key Stage 4, I would stop at this point. But sometimes when I'm working with adults or university students, if there is time, it's useful to go a bit deeper and explore briefly the complexities of the situation in India and how it connects to the UK. So historically, India has not been a major contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. From 1870 to 2019, its emissions added up to a minuscule 4% of the global total. For nearly 100 years of this period, Britain ruled in India. So, and coal mining began in India in around 1774, when the East India Company opened its first commercial coal mine. And production was boosted by the introduction of steam trains and grew steadily. Indian industrial entrepreneurs, such as the Tatars and the Tagores, the famous poet, Rabindranath Tagore, his father was an industrialist, they were actually precluded by legislation from developing steam railways and shipping. This was something the British held on to. By 1946, India was producing 30 million metric tons of coal and supplied Britain during both world wars. And a lot of people don't realize this. Again, International Women's Day, thousands of dispossessed Adivasi women worked, and men worked, provided the labor for this coal. Widespread deforestation under the British also contributed to the historic carbon emissions. So the renowned economist Utsav Patnaik, drawing on nearly 2 centuries of detailed data on tax and trade, calculated that Britain drained nearly a total of nearly $45 trillion from India during the period 1765 to 1938. There are links, when you get the PowerPoint, there are links to the sources for this, so you can explore this a bit further. This is 17 times more than the total annual gross domestic product of the United Kingdom today. And this is in tax. This is not all the other things. So not included in this sum are the people forced into indentured labor and sent to work around the world, the Indian soldiers who fought in the 2 world wars, and the labor of the many, many other Indians exploited by the British. So when Indians gained independence in 1947, they were given back a country drained of its economic resources and set on a path that was already dependent on coal. Gandhi argued that India's development should be a green rural model based on the network of these self-sufficient, self-governing villages with extensive access to land and forest. In fact, what he was proposing was a kind of no growth or a degrowth type of society. Other sort of third world thinkers have done similar. Frantz Fanon had similar ideas, and so the idea was not to go down the same route that Europe had gone down. But the newly independent government, I guess because this is to be explored, I think, within theoretical terms, but because it's actually difficult to do that in one country, set out on the path of industrial development based on economic growth and high energy consumption. But in this economic growth race, countries that have been colonized start with an extreme disadvantage. At the time of COP, Sunita Narayan, who runs the Center for Science and Environment in India, who's quite an important commentator, was saying the issue will be how can growth be equitable so that the poor are not denied their right to development. So while we might think that societies like ours in the UK are overdeveloped, people like Jason Hickel point out, who writes about degrowth, that there are some societies where some growth is still necessary for some people. The poor do not have the access to things that we have. And she says, as we set the goal to grow without pollution, we must work on increasing clean but affordable energy. So India argues that developed nations must stop their use of fossil fuels, including oil and gas, sooner than poor countries. This is not happening. I mean, others argue this as well. And that mitigation and adaptation, i.e. moving away from coal and switching to renewables, helping people cope with the damage caused by climate change, etc., has to be paid for by the rich nations, reparations, or as it's known, loss and damage in COP language. And again, this is not happening. India has also set itself ambitious targets. It'd be interesting to see if these can be met. To reduce projected carbon emissions by 1 billion tonnes from 2021 to 2030. This is significantly more than a bigger reduction than the US is offering, which is still above the limits that are needed in order to keep the temperature down, the temperature rise down. I mean, by 2030, the whole of the world cannot be emitting more than 2.14 tonnes per capita if the temperatures stay below 1.5. So India is actually closer to the targets than some, at least in theory, than some developed countries are. And it is aiming to do this by switching to renewables, a big switch to renewables. But this is not without problems, because conflicts with farmers and pastoralists are escalating over land grabbed by corporations for solar and wind companies. And Adani is one of the biggest culprits in this, they are in conflict with farmers in the south of India over agricultural land that's been given over to solar parks, euphemistically named solar parks, and in the north of India, in Rajasthan, with pastoralists and with environmentalists over wind turbines that are on migration routes and also threaten rare species like the great Indian bustard, of which there are very, very few left. The ornithologists here know about that. So yeah, I think there's about 15 left actually. The power lines are a danger to them, and Adani has been taken to court and have been asked to move them, and that still hasn't happened. So it is highly questionable, even if they switch to green and renewable energy from coal and manage to do that switch, who actually is going to benefit? So then that brings us to the issue of climate justice at a national and local level. So while people are being dispossessed on one hand for land, for coal mining, others are totally dependent on coal mining, and many of them Adivasis who've been dispossessed of their land. So going from that beautiful drawing of the life in the forest to something like this in the picture. So just to give you a little example that I got actually during COP from someone who writes quite a lot about just transition from away from coal, is Sandeep Pai. He did a really useful set of tweets explaining to people the problems and pointing out that in the Indian state of Jharkhand, which is one of the states most vulnerable to climate change and next to Chhattisgarh, about 300,000 people work directly with government-owned coal mines, so Coal India, where they belong to trade unions and where they have fixed salaries, better salaries than people who Adani cuts salaries considerably, so people who end up working for Adani and considerably less. These are the people who may benefit to some extent because they have that union support if there is a just transition. But then he pointed out in his tweets that nearly 4 million people in India have livelihoods directly or indirectly linked to coal, and they are precarious workers, including people who scavenge for coal. And I think it's important not to underestimate that they're not just, it's like a sort of a so-called artisanal labor, actually provides a significant amount of wealth to the country and to the world as a whole, despite the fact that they seem to be small scale. And India's coal belt is dotted by industries that need fuel like pig iron, steel, brick making, concrete. And the Indian Railways, one of the country's largest employers, earns half its revenue by transporting coal, which means it is able to keep the prices of the tickets low, which because it subsidizes passenger travel, which enables people who are driven from their land to travel across India looking for work. So transitioning to a reduced dependence on coal will be no easy task, because what will happen to all these people? And it's clear that they don't count for very much already, and they will not be the beneficiaries of India's growth-driven economy. The biggest beneficiaries will be big businesses, most notably Adani and Ambani. The farmers' strikes and protests that went on for quite a long time in India were against Ambani and Adani as well. They are very close to Modi, Tata, Jindal and others. And as India's demand for fossil fuels or renewables keeps on growing, it is also impacting on climate change. And already companies like Adani have an extractivist agenda in India and elsewhere, so I mentioned earlier the solar parks and the wind turbines. In order to achieve a just transition where people are not sacrificed and their land is not sacrificed, we actually need different models of development. So where to start? What other models are there? Let's return to the Adivasi forest dwellers resisting coal mining in the Hasdeo Arand. The people who marched against coal mining in the Hasdeo Forest on Gandhi's birthday on October the 2nd were very clear that their actions were about protecting the climate and that they envisaged an alternative model of economic development. So here is the opening paragraph of the rallying cry to the marchers. Comrades, Johar. The federal and the state governments, instead of protecting the rights of tribal and other traditional forest dwellers, have joined hands with mining companies and have been working towards devastating our forests and land. The threat of climate change has in one way or another threatened the existence of every creature on this planet. Even then, governments, along with mining companies, are eager to destroy the beautiful and huge Hasdeo Forest. There's a link to that, all of that speech. And here they are again, with their portrait of Gandhi. So the person on the left, Alok Shukla, he's a well-known local environmentalist who works with these Adivasi communities in the Hasdeo Forest. And on the right, you can see the rally before they set up on their march. I should mention that when chainsaws came in to cut down the trees, people went in to occupy the forest, and they have now been there a year. So Alok Shukla is saying, we chose this day because it is Gandhi Jayanti. Gandhi argued that India resides in its villages. In the India of his dreams, villages were to be self-reliant. Politicians pay homage to Gandhi every 2nd of October, but they dishonor his principles. We are witnessing the decimation of villages in order to hand over their natural resources to corporations. During the pandemic, we saw that when so many migrant workers had nowhere to go, they returned to their villages. So the government should be looking to economically strengthen the villages. But the development model that it is ramming through is destroying the very survival base of the villages. Coal will be extracted and the villages of Hasdeo will not get anything from this development model. It will signal their destruction. However, I just want to say that it has come up with students that even Gandhi has to be examined critically. And I've had students say to me that they are aware of and uncomfortable with Gandhi's attitude to the Black struggle in South Africa. And he also conflicted with Ambedkar, who wrote the Indian Constitution, who was an eminent lawyer, intellectual, over issues of caste. Gandhi's approach was conservative, albeit benevolent, and somewhat naive. He thought that the upper castes should protect the lower castes. This has not happened in India. And it does not sit comfortably with the Dalit people, the low caste people in India, who have their own struggles and are linked closely sometimes to the Adivasi struggles, but some of them also live on land that is being taken. However, he did spend a year walking across India and a lifetime getting to know its villages and the people. And this is what inspired the economic ideas that others went on to develop, leaving behind some of those other views that perhaps don't sit comfortably with us, didn't then and don't now. And so therefore, on International Women's Day, I think we should give the last words to Soni Sori, because she would be, generations before her, one of the people that inspired Gandhi. She says, our fight is not just for the Adivasis, but for everyone in the country. Without the Adivasis, you have no hope of protecting your nature, your resources, or your humanity. We might be illiterates for you, but we Adivasis are your source of courage and bravery, and that is essential to fight injustice. And not only is she proud of her indigenous heritage, but she encourages tribes to hold on to their distinctive identity, separating them from mainstream religious traditions such as Hinduism. Although I have to say that, you know, there's also many Hindus and Catholics and other people involved in these struggles. But she says, for us, religion is not about visiting temples, mosques, and churches. Our gods roam free, and there's a strong spiritual force in nature that anchors us to our lands. And those are the words of Soni Sori, who still remains an eminent activist in the resistance to coal mining, leading her people against giant multinational corporations, which is the last words.